live and recording. We have no viewers yet, so there's no time like the present. All right. So bear with me here. We're going to start the show. All right. Joe's off. And I run my camera. All right. Here we go. Oh. There. Fix that framing. All right. Now, here we go. Just in case I have to separate the audio later. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Open Source Tonight, episode 20. I'm Vincent Maggard, and I'm here today with the wonderful Joe Collins.
So now I'm wonderful, huh?
Yes.
Thanks.
You're wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so today we're going to be
I've never been described as wonderful before.
Never.
Not in 40 years of radio and television has anybody ever called me wonderful.
I mean, there's a first time for
everything. Does this mean we're engaged?
No, it does not. I think your wife might have something to say about that, too, for the record.
She doesn't have to know.
She doesn't. We just had a viewer leave over that joke.
Why don't you tell people what we're here to talk about?
Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea.
Lives.
Yeah, this isn't a joke show, folks. Though me and Joe's definitely trying. You sure about that? All right, we're going to be talking... People are going to be sitting there driving down the road listening to this being like, what the heck is wrong with these people? Today, what we're going to be talking about is our Linux stories. How we found Linux, why we like Linux, stuff like that. What do you think about that, Joe?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that'll work just fine. That should fill up about 20 minutes or so, don't you think?
20 minutes? I could do 6 hours on this.
Let's try not to... Try to condense a little bit,
Just a little. We're just going to condense a tiny little bit,
Just a tiny bit, man,
Yeah, just a tiny bit, everybody. We're going to just gently condense our contents of the broadcast. Anyway, so Joe, do you want to start or you want me to start?
You can start. I don't really know your story. I think you know mine because you've watched a bunch of my videos, but I really don't know yours. You take it.
All right. Yeah, I know a little bit of your story, but I have a feeling there's a lot of missing pieces, but I'm sure you'll fill them in. Anyway, everybody, my story is a bit complicated.
Are you done yet? No. Sorry. I'll be quiet and not interrupt. Please continue.
Great. All right. Anyway, but folks, so my story's a little complicated because I got two friends and I can't remember which one actually introduced me to Linux, and they both say that they're the one that did it. They want credit. So one of my friends, we're not even going to say which one, right? We're just going to say a friend. They introduced me to this little operating system called Linux when I was about 13 years old, and they had I can't remember for sure, but I believe if the one I believe is right, they introduced me to it on a virtual machine. And it was Ubuntu. I remember being introduced to Ubuntu, and it was very interesting. And I believe it was Ubuntu 12.04, and it was the server version. I wasn't introduced to the desktop version. I was introduced to the server version first, and I played around with that a little bit. And then I started to play with the desktop pretty quickly thereafter that. And the first version of Linux, not Linux Mint, but Ubuntu that I ran on bare metal system that I remember is 14.04. And I ran that as a dual boot, which I know Joe is not a fan of, which, I broke it several times. So not necessarily the best strategy. But anyway, it was a dual boot system with Windows 7 at the time, and it actually worked pretty good. I found myself spending more and more time on Ubuntu, but I eventually ended up going back to Windows, and then it was about 2017 that I decided to go back to the House of Linux, and I haven't went back. I'm still here running Linux on a daily basis all over the place. And to quote Joe, it's like potato chips. You can't just only have one. So I've got a Linux machine over here. I've got a Raspberry Pi running Linux over here. I've got the computer Joe's on right now, and the chat's on running Linux. What can I say? I might have a tiny bit of Linux in here. So But anyway, that's how I got started with it, and then I started playing around with Bash scripts and writing Python, and ended up even getting a programming gig because my first client, they wanted somebody that could write code on Linux, and I had just happened to have figured that out a little bit before that they reached out. So it ended up working out for me professionally and personally. So if that's not a testimonial for Linux, I don't know what is.
Wow. So you've been playing around with it since you were 13.
Yeah, it's been a
When
while.
I was 13, I was playing with a Commodore 64.
Oh my goodness. I think it was 13.
I was punching
will
in
say,
BASIC, trying to get a ball to go across the screen. Go.
yeah.
That's what I was doing.
Uh-huh. I will say this. I'm not clear for 100% sure. When I say 13, it's kind of my early teenage years. It might have been 14 or 15, but it was something along the lines of about 2012. And yeah, so something in that neighborhood.
That's right about the time, honestly, that I started to get serious about Linux was about 2012. Up to that point, I had played with it, and I used to keep it running in virtual machines to play with, and then about 2012 was when I decided, okay, it's time to devote this to hardware.
There you go. Yeah. And I mean that devoting it to the hardware, that's the big movement, right? That is the
I had
big deal.
I had a laptop that was worthless on Windows 7, and it was like a dual core. I don't remember whether it was an Acer or an Asus, some cheap low end laptop, and it just did. It was horribly buggy on Windows 7, and I installed Linux on it, and it had AMD graphics in it, and it worked. It worked well enough to actually be useful. But my story with Linux actually goes back to Unix. When my first real job out of school, I went to work for a radio station, WTAR and WLTY in Norfolk. And this would have been the summer of 1989. And they had a Unix mainframe running Basis. And they had terminals all over the building. So this was the standard Unix model of one big machine and everybody has an account and you could log in and you could get what you needed to get done with it. It was green screen monitors. It was the basic use of the machine was to process what the news wires sent. So we had API, UPI, and CBS radios, print newswire all coming in at once. And so there you could see those and you could print stories. Also had word processing and there was some other things on it, but it was like a standard Unix system. And so while Linus Torvalds was creating the Linux kernel, I was using Unix every day, but I was not an administrator. I just had a user account and I did nothing to maintain the computer. I think I only walked back and looked at it twice, the entire 4 years I worked at that place, because I wasn't that terribly interested in it, to tell you the truth. It was just something I had to do at work. And anyway, much later on, the next time that I saw Linux or thought about Linux or Unix or anything like it this would have been 1999. I went to work for Gateway Computer in Hampton, and they had a computer lab at that particular factory, and they had a machine in there that was running Linux, Open Caldera Linux. And that was the first time I ever saw it running. And I started learning about it. And that's when I heard about this thing called Linux. And it was a free operating system. And it worked like Unix, which I loved Unix. I like that model of logging into the terminal and everything. And I was like, oh, I can do this on my home PC. This is cool. But it still took about 5 or 6 years before I actually started to download and play with Linux. I actually got a book. This would have been around 2000. It was a Sam's book called Learn Linux in 10 Minutes. And they were teaching Open Caldera in there. I still have the book. And that was my introduction to it. But it took a long time before I downloaded it. The first Linux that I actually downloaded and installed was Ubuntu. So that would have been 2006 or 2007. And I immediately took it off the computer because I couldn't make it do anything. And I got very frustrated with it. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And, I was very typical. At that time, I would have been a Windows user for many, many years and doing Windows stuff at work with networks and whatnot. So I didn't understand what I was looking at, got frustrated with it, stopped, playing with it. But it wouldn't go away. It was always, I got curious and I went, well, maybe, hold on, let's try that one more time. I kept reinstalling it and uninstalling it and playing with it and getting frustrated with it. And like I said, it's been like that ever since. I don't personally own a Windows machine. I have one that is for my work that I have, but I haven't actually had Windows that I own and maintain since 2014. So that's kind of how it was. And then in 2012, like I said, I put it on a laptop, but then my main machine was Windows. I dumped that in 2014, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like me in 2017 where I'm like, you know what, that's it. I'm going to stay on Linux. Now, I do have a Windows machine still kicking around that I actually maintain. I maintain one Windows 10 box for some Windows 10 or Windows-only software, but almost everything I do is on Linux or Mac OS anymore, so I'm in the Unix family.
My day job at the radio station requires that I have a Windows machine, so it's their machine that's sitting on my desk. It's not even on my local network. So it's like it's all firewalled off. You can't even see it on the network.
It's in its own little corner of the world, and it can't talk to anything else. Yep.
Exactly. And then when I actually log into it, I immediately VPN into the network at the radio station anyway. So it's totally not, doesn't share anything locally. And if I do have to take something from a Linux machine and put it in the Windows machine, I have a USB drive and I do it, physically. I don't ever, those machines don't talk to each other. And that's how I prefer to do it. And that way, if I, for some reason, lose or quit my job, whatever, all I got to do is box the crap up, send it back and say, here's your computer. And there's nothing personal on it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, from a data security standpoint, that sounds pretty smart, right? You don't have to worry about it. If it gets compromised, then, it's not a big deal because it doesn't have any access to the network where the personal data is, and it obviously doesn't have personal data on it itself. So, and then if you do, retire or quit or whatever, you just mail the computer back and you're done. So, can't really beat that.
What was it about Windows that made you want to use Linux?
Okay, so full disclosure, I've never liked the way Windows works. That's the most easy way to answer that question in 5 seconds or less. But because it's me, I want to elaborate. So basically, the real thing for me when it came to Windows, and the reason that, I understand Windows has a purpose and it, some people use it and that's up to them. But the thing I have an issue with Windows is I don't like the way the architecture of the OS works. For me, it's a very technical reason because when you look at the way Linux works and you look at the way Mac OS works, and I liked Mac OS before I liked Linux. And then after that I was using Mac, I found out about Linux around that time. At least that's as far as my memory goes back. And what I did,
the layers? Is it the layers of Windows, or is it just, what is it? Explain exactly what you mean by architecture.
Okay, so the architecture, what I'm talking about is the fact that I like a Unix style workflow, where you've got Bash, you've got SSH built in. I grew to love that on the Mac. And then I didn't particularly like the way Apple was going as a company when it came to their hardware being all unuser repairable. But unfortunately, the way things are going, I think that's going to happen on the Windows side and at some point as well. Linux, I think, will be the last systems that are user repairable, but maybe I'll be wrong. But regardless, I don't want to get into that topic for too long. Maybe we'll do a video on that. But I wanted a system that was Unix-like, that I controlled, that I could build. And I didn't want a Hackintosh because, I wanted to have something I wasn't kind of, am I breaking the end-user license agreement, right? So I already knew about Linux, and I started thinking, well, it's got Bash, it's got a lot of things that are similar to Mac OS from a Unix standpoint, style of workflow. Obviously, there's major distinctions. They're not identical, no question about it. But if you get under the hood deep enough, they start to feel similar. And that's where I was interested in being. So because of that, I ended up intentionally wanting to go to Linux because of that. And then over time, I realized just how nice Linux was for reliability. I realized just how nice that it was for customizability. I have been playing around lately with Linux and doing some really cool stuff. I built basically a kiosk system where it launches a program, and that's all it is. There's no login screen, there's no permissions. It's just, these are the things you can do with Linux. And as a tinkerer, I like to tinker. So, for me, I think Linux was a match made in heaven, is what it really was.
Well, I worked with Windows for many, many, many years in radio stations and television stations, and I thought Windows XP was great, except for the giant gaping security holes that they took forever to fill up. But generally speaking, I thought it was a cool system. I did not go to Windows Vista. I wasn't going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Windows 7 I thought was pretty good. And but then Windows 8 came along, and I remember looking at that and going, I'm not using that.
Yeah, but no, as far as our stories go, Joe, I don't know where you want to go with this, but I remember around the time that I got into Ubuntu, not long after that, within a year or two, I got into the Raspberry Pi. And that right there, I mean, one of those little Raspberry Pis, you know what, why don't I just show it here for the whole 3 people in the whole world that's never seen one. This is a Raspberry Pi right here. It's a little computer running an ARM processor, and it can run Linux. I know, isn't that great, running Linux? Never would have guessed that on this channel. And it's pretty nice. I've got servers. I've built little internal things off of it, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can run a little simple internal website off of this. You can do media serving off of this. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can run Asterisk on it and make a phone system out of it. That's what this one has on it. So,
he makes phone systems for fun. He gets bored and he decides he's going to make a phone system. My favorite part, going down that road there is I love the fact that Linux works on old hardware. My entire network of machines is junk. It's something that somebody didn't wanted. They didn't want. I ended up putting some memory and a hard drive in it, and there you go, right? The machine that I'm working on right now is from 2014. This is the one you're watching me on. And it's running Ubuntu 22.04 swimmingly with Wayland. That's what I like about it, is the fact that it is not the computer that I use for work, for instance, that's running Windows 10. We were talking about it earlier. Windows 10 doesn't drive the video properly, nor does it even see the sound card that's in the computer. And when I first set it up, I was looking for drivers. And fortunately, I got an outboard Focusrite Scarlett that I use USB audio to get in and out of the machine. So I don't need the sound card in it at all. If I did, I would, because it doesn't work. I know for a fact that I can take that same machine, load Ubuntu or any other Linux distribution on it. Every piece of hardware on it's going to work. And that's an amazing thing.
Indeed it is. That's another thing that's good about Linux, I do have to agree with you, is that you can run it on pretty much anything. Like one of these. Again, I am not sponsored by the Raspberry Pi Foundation yet. I've got the phone right here. Give me the call and we'll get the paperwork. Anyway. I'm just saying, I like Raspberry Pis. I've got a million of them anyway.
People ask me questions about Raspberry Pis, and I just go, I don't know. I ain't got one. I don't mess with them.
We got to send the field unit out
but it's just not.
Yeah, we got to send the field unit out to Joe Collins, everybody, and we'll get him set up with a Raspberry Pi.
I don't need no Pi. Thank you. I need a new desktop, though.
Make it out of a Raspberry Pi.
Can you run a virtual machine on a Raspberry Pi?
Actually, yes, you can, but it's gotta be. It's gotta be.
I bet it's slow.
I've not done it, but I've talked to people that's done it. Apparently, it's possible. But from what I understand, you got to have pretty low utilization on that. They've got a model. It's got 8 gigs of RAM, so you could have like a 2 or 3 gig, 4 gig RAM VM or something in it, and you could boot one of these off an SSD. They're not the worst server in the world.
I'll tell you another thing that I like about Linux, and you could argue that Windows has moved more and more toward a model something like this, but you still don't have the hard separation that you do in Unix-like operating systems, and that is that the system is the system, and your personal data and all of the users on your computer are in a completely different world, which means that you can back up all of the personal data without affecting anything that has to do with the system, or restore it, or vice versa. You can upgrade Linux while leaving the personal data completely alone. Have a separate partition for your home and your root directory. I love that. That's one of my very favorite things about Linux, is the fact that you can segregate the system. And if you really get into it, you can really separate things. I mean, you can have your boot on one partition. You can have your temp on another, like in a RAM disk. You could have just the sky's the limit on what you could do as far as how you can spread this thing out,
Yeah. No, I mean, you can do some pretty nice things with it. Personally, that is a nice thing about Linux and Unix style OSs in general, is the fact that you do have, and I do like this, a lot more permissions based and controls, and there's just really a separation between your kernel level operations and what Vincent's little Python script's doing, setting down the desktop as a random user on the system, right? Mm-hmm. So, you can have a Linux system where, like put BusyBox on it or something, and you can lock that down to really a pretty intense level. So, it's something that you can do, and then you can have a system that, quite frankly, the user can barely do anything, right? You can say this user can run these 5 things. Right, you can get, this is the thing about Linux, you can get that strict if you really need to.
Oh yeah, you can lock it.
And you can set down, all these files are readable, but you can't have anything else happen in there. You can have drives mounted all over the place. I mean, you could really
once you get your mind wrapped around how the permissions work and how groups work. And groups are something that we really don't hear about a lot these days, because that goes back to the days of like when I was working on a mini frame. You would be a member of a group, and then you would have access to files that were available to that group. But there could be another group in another department working on a completely different project. You didn't have access to their stuff. You didn't see it. You couldn't do anything about it. And that was all, figured out by the administrator, the super user. They would assign the groups and whatnot, and you would become a member of the group, and now you could work on it. And it opens up all kinds of crazy doors. Like I said, these days, because we have Linux computers are like potato chips, and we have 14 of them running, we don't think too much about groups. Ubuntu and Linux Mint use groups as a way to gradiate. I guess that would grade. I don't know if I'm using the right word. What a user can do. So right now you think of in terms of being an administrator or just a regular user. Well, there's actually grades in between, and you can be a regular user, but you could have access to this, which is something that a privileged user would be able to do, but not necessarily that you could run sudo, for instance. Now those situations are very few and far between, and it's not very often that you do a custom profile, but it's possible. If you want to dig into it, you can do it. Windows, I think pretty much anybody can do anything. I've not really messed around with it enough to know.
I mean, I will have to defend Windows here. I mean, this is, group policy, if you're technical and you're using a pro version, you can lock things down a lot. However,
Yeah.
I'm pro Linux, folks, so I'm still going to be sitting here saying I like Linux. As far as I'm concerned, I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons to like Linux without even really having to have an issue with Windows. I think some people definitely jump ship for that, but to me, it's a side note. I jump ship mostly because I prefer the way Linux works, and
I have one friend. I don't know if he'll be watching this or not. His name is John. You know who you are. Man, every opportunity he gets, he's got something to say about Microsoft. And sometimes I pull him off a ledge. I'm like, dude, calm down. It's all right.
There you go. But yeah, no, but regardless of that, I think Linux as a system, you've got groups, and you actually can use groups for some interesting things. You can use them. I've seen them used for specific programs that need to run and have access to another thing, and so they'll share a group of a user, so the user can put stuff in there and the program can read it. Like, there is still some use cases for it. Another thing too, I used to play with LDAP on Linux. Think of group policy,
Yes,
but for Linux, and Active Directory. Oh, it's so much fun until you break all of your systems doing it, and then you decide you don't want to touch it anymore. Don't ask me how I know that you don't want to touch it anymore and it breaks all your systems. I was, in the name of science, I was testing things.
I every now and again I get a question about somebody who's playing with something that has LDAP in them. All I ever really say to them is run. Just run as quickly as you can. Go away. You don't want to deal with that. My favorite thing about Linux, absolutely, if somebody, just to be honest about it, that you can kind of sort of maybe do this in Windows, but not really, is SSH. Is the fact that I can be sitting, I have all of my machines have static IP addresses, and even though my ISP's router does not have a name server on it, I can still, with a shortcut, jump into every machine in the house with, 3 or 4 keystrokes. And somebody can be sitting there playing a game, and I'm in the background grabbing files or doing updates or checking on something or doing this in their machine. They have no clue that I'm there. I'm in and out. They have no idea that's going on. It's just such a tremendous feeling of power. And if you need a resource that's on another machine, you use something like SSHFS or SFTP to go get the files, or set up a tunnel through the network where you have like network storage that's appearing as a local directory on your machine, but it's actually on another machine. And this is all done, not NFS we're talking about, which is another level. We're talking about SSHFS, where you can just set this up with a few keystrokes. Boom, there it is. When you're done with it, make it disappear, and it's like it was never there. That stuff to me is just super amazing. And it doesn't matter where the computer is. I have like my website runs on a computer. Well, the instance is running on a machine in Dallas, Texas. Well, I can be sitting at my machine doing whatever I need to do on that machine. You don't even know. It just happens to be, about 1,000 miles of network between me and that, That's my favorite thing.
SSH is such a wonderful thing. That's another thing I really, really love about Linux, is just the fact that, and I did allude to it a little bit earlier when I was talking about Mac, how you could just remote in. And I mean, you can get SSH on Windows, but here's the thing. Linux there's a CLI way to do everything. And I guess in Windows, maybe there's a way. But, a lot of it really comes back to me, there's the fact that I just like the way a Unix style OS works. And, so even if you say to me, well, you can set up the SSH server on Windows 10, which is possible. It ships it as something you can install without having to go to a website or anything. Yeah, but when I get logged in, I hate the Windows command prompt with a passion. So
and
what's the point,
Yeah, what I was going to say, what's the point? What are you going to do when you're in there? When you log into a Linux machine through that, through SSH, even if other people are using it, you have complete control of this computer. I can run graphic applications through SSH on my network because I use X forwarding. And so I can pull up anything that I need within reason. You don't run a web browser or something that needs accelerated graphics, but simple things, configuration tools and whatnot, run through the network. So you can pointy and clicky if you want to. So if you have to do that, that's great. But you have just complete control of this machine. And if you don't like what somebody else is doing with it, you can kill the process that they're running. I mean, it's crazy what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, SSH, if you were talking about it, being able to remote in, I mean, look, there's probably a way to do a lot of this stuff on Windows, I would think. Probably. Maybe
well,
with
in
third-party
Windows,
tools
they have the concept of Windows. I've noticed that the concept is more of a matter of using a remote desktop and going into that whole point-and-click environment.
Yeah,
and
it's a GUI-based thing.
And, it's very GUI-based.
And I mean, I will say this. RDP is actually an interesting protocol. It's got some security issues in the past that it's had and such, but it actually doesn't work too bad depending on what you're doing with it. But the thing is, for me, I really like the way that that Linux works. And, you can do the X forwarding, you can set up VNC, and I'll tell you something else too. I have RDP set up on my Linux machines. I can RDP into them. Mm-hmm. So, you can do that. I use the official RDP client from Microsoft on my Mac. And it works fine. I don't need to change anything. So you can have a lot. And I'll tell you something we can do on Linux that you can't do on Windows with RDP unless you get Windows Server and pay all this money. You can actually have multiple people RDP'd in to different user accounts on like a big honking server in a data center. And on Windows, if I RDP to my Windows 10 Pro system, it kicks out anybody else that's sitting in front of the box and any other RDP connection. So it's you have to be that one user and that's it. Versus with Linux, I've RDP'd into it on my Mac and then been able to do something else in a different session on the same box physically in front of me. Not that you would probably need to do that if you're one person, but I'm just saying it proves that it's possible if you say needed to.
And the other thing, it's like once you're SSH'd into one machine on Linux, it's the other thing is you can hop around the network. You can find yourself on one machine and then you're hopping to another machine from that machine and then you forget how far you've hopped. Have you done that before?
Of course. I think we've all done that.
That's interesting. And, you forget that it's like, wait a minute. I'm actually hopped 2 machines over. Maybe I want to back up and rethink that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's happened to me before where I'm like, I don't realize I'm on the local terminal. I'll exit the session and I'll be like, why is this file not here? And then I go and I look at it. I'm like, oh, the host name's not what I thought it was on this box. I'm on the wrong box. But one thing that I do is where I manage other systems for people. Sometimes I will actually have SSH access to other people's systems. Of course, approved access with keys and everything. And one thing that I have done before with some networks is SSH in to their network, and then I can manage other things in the network because they have that one endpoint I can get into. So I'll SSH into a box, and then I'll be like, great, and I need to get to another box on the same subnet, and then I can just type in the right login, inside of that session. And so it makes it easy to have, a very simple remote management system. It might not be as good as OpenVPN, but the way I like to do it, if I'm going to expose SSH to the world, and I have done that on servers and stuff that I maintain for myself before, is I say it's got to be my key, and you can't log in with the password, you can't log in with root, and so there's a lot of security layers. So it's not impossible. There's no such thing as perfect security in anything. I'm a firm believer in that. But if you set it up right, you can increase the odds substantially that, unless you're stupid and just say, hey, here's my SSH key and here's the IP of the server. Don't do that. Give them
Go for it.
I mean, at that point, that's not even really hacking. That's just you just saying, here, have it. That's, but I mean,
it's like I tell people all the time, it's like, if somebody wants to hack you and they're coming after you specifically, let's say it's the FBI, for instance, you ain't got to hope they'll get in.
One of the things I really like about SSH with keys is the fact that I have all these programs that are watching for directories to have a brand new file dropped in them, and then it will do whatever I want. Well, SSH, you can use SFTP, you can use secure copy, etc., and you can drop files onto the system really easy. So if I know /temp/watch, let's say, that's not one of the real ones, but if it was, and if I drop a text file in there, let's say that it's supposed to make a phone call and read out that message or whatever, then it could do it. So for example, I built a bunch of different things. One program I built a while back was a video transcoder. It had a watch folder, and if you drop a video file in there, just say FFmpeg, convert it to what we want. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it was done, I would be able to see that it was placed where it was supposed to be, and I would be notified, and I could sit there and great. And I've got my file transcoded. So it made it really easy if, say, I wanted all my video files to be in a specific format, I just dropped them all in that watch folder and walked away.
See, when I want to send stuff over a network by SSH, I use rsync. About, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now, I got involved with writing a couple of backup utilities. One for myself and another one I was working on with a friend. And between those two, I learned everything that rsync can do. And essentially, if you know what time shift does in Linux Mint and Ubuntu and Debian, we wrote a program that does that on servers with no GUI. So we learned real quick how to do rsync. And rsync through SSH, it assumes SSH, and it assumes that you have a key. And if you just know what to type, and it's really not that terribly hard, you can tell it to get into another machine and drop a file anywhere you want it to go, and then it'll close the connection, and it's all done, that quickly. But rsync and SSH go together like peas in a pod, because you can do over the network, over the net backups. I mean, that's really 3/4 of what my scripts are, is just syncing stuff up all the time. It's a wrapper around an rsync command that, makes sure it grabs the right thing and sends it off to wherever it needs to go. And because I'm a little crazy about having all the computers synced, I have an account on each one of my machines. And so whatever machine I happen to be working on at that moment, if I create something new, then I can just fire off one of these scripts, and it'll go around and sync every machine that's on the network at that moment with what I'm doing. So everybody gets updated. And that's the kind of thing that SSH makes it easy to do. I dare you to try and figure out how to do that with Windows.
Wouldn't want to try.
Have it be,
Wouldn't want to try. But yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the fact that you can do SSH alone on Linux is probably enough reason to keep me around.
Yes, exactly.
Just the fact that you can do that.
There is actually a utility on Windows that works kind of sort of like rsync. It's been a long time since I saw it, so if it ain't around, I'm sorry. It's called xxcopy, and it doesn't come with the system. You have to install it. And I don't remember what the licensing is on it and all that other stuff. But it will do a lot of the things that rsync will do, like take snapshots of one directory, and in other words, take two directories and make them identical. So you say, okay, I want this directory to look just like this directory. And if anything changes, add it. And if anything's deleted, delete it, and make sure that they're 100%. There is a utility for Windows that will do that. It's called xxcopy.
Cool. But yeah, again, for me, SSH is really just alone that, and then in fact you could do bash scripts and Python and combine all that together. I mean, you can, if you're technical, you can make a Linux system just purr like a kitty.
And the other thing about Linux is that I used to have this thing when I was doing installs for people, that I would give them a year of support for free. And somebody asked me, well, how do you keep up with giving people a year of support for free? I say, it's real easy. They never call me. Because once you get it set up,
that's one way to do it.
It's absolutely true. Once you get them set up and they are doing what they need to do, and they have the applications they need, and their printer works and all that, they have no reason to call you. This stuff, as long as you just let it, you're conservative about it, you pick the right operating system and whatnot, it will just run. And the only times I ever got calls were when people upgraded hardware or got curious about moving to another system or something like that. It was never, if it was just Ubuntu or Linux Mint running, people were fine. I never heard from them.
Yeah. A while back, I had a lady that wanted help with her computer.
You
And
got a lady?
No,
Tell us all about it.
no, not like that, Joe. I don't mean like
Oh,
I was
gee,
married to her or
man,
something.
come on.
No, I'm talking. I had a lady that came over, and it was a friend of my mom's.
Oh, she came over.
She.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Anyway, and she wanted some help with her computer. This lady did, and I talked her into using Linux. Put Ubuntu on there, and she's called a couple times. She had her speakers messed up, and it wasn't even a Linux issue. It was an issue with the speakers, if memory serves. And then had to set her up with, what was it? I think it was a new drive because her drive died on her or something, I think. Something like that. But I mean, realistically, those aren't Linux fault.
No, that's just normal computer stuff.
That's just normal computer stuff. And, as far as I know, knock on wood, unless I get a call in a few minutes, that system should still be working great. And that's been, I guess it's been almost a year now, come to think of it. So that's pretty good, a year of not having to call support in very often at all. And then when it did, it wasn't really Linux issues. It's pretty good.
My mom is 81 years old. She has been running Linux on her computer at home for, I would say, more than 5 years now. I cannot remember when I switched her over. And I will go over there and do things like check the system. I'm going to go over there pretty soon and swap out the hard drive, because the hard drive that's been running in that machine, it's actually been in two machines. It's one of those deals where you take the hard drive out of one and put it in another and that sort of thing. So I'm getting ready to give her a fresh hard drive and replace her CPU fan and things like that. She never calls me. Occasionally I'll get a call, and it's like you said, it's not Linux related stuff. It'll be something to do with the printer or the router or something like. It's never, oh, Linux is giving me a problem. No, she's got that down. She understands how all that works. It's other things, but it's been quite the experience to support her, especially her. When she had Windows on her computer, she was always afraid of doing anything because she was afraid she was going to break it. And now she's into genealogy and ancestry and keeping her own records and whatnot. And she's, on some levels, when it talks about some of these servers she works with, she knows more than I do. She'll ask me a question and I'll go, I have no clue. I don't even know what you're talking about. So that's, I think that's another thing about Linux that we haven't even touched on, is that it empowers people. It's free. You go learn how to use it, and you can do whatever you want with it. And it's not like everybody else that they're going in, you have to dip into your pocket every time. No, you just have to go learn how to use the software. It's out there.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the fact that it's open source and it's license, license free in the sense that, there's a license, right? An open source license, but you don't have to get that license key out and pay some money. And, that's part of the thing I really do like about Linux, is the fact that I throw it on a little bit of everything, because why not? It's free. And if I can use it for something, why not? So you can definitely have a nice experience, just by doing that and not even talking about anything else. So I personally really think that that's a big selling point of Linux, if you will, is just the fact that, it's something that it's free. And if you don't like it or it doesn't work for you, you get, like Joe suggested in his videos before, just get a separate system, try it out. And, you may find that maybe for whatever the reason you have to have a Windows machine or a Mac machine or whatever. Well, it doesn't cost you anything to have Linux. You can use that for other stuff.
No, you can.
And the other thing, too, is nobody's forcing you to use Linux, right? You can, it's not like you're wasting any money if you decide, I don't want to use this anymore. You go throw BSD on it, or you could, put Windows on that system, or, you have choice. I think that's the easiest way to summarize how great Linux is in 5 seconds or less. You have a choice of desktop, a choice of shell, a choice of basically everything that there is to have a choice of. You can pretty well choose it on a Linux system. And, if it doesn't exist and you got the technical skill, you have the ability to sit there and say, well, the desktop that does what I want, for example, doesn't exist, but I can build it. All right, well, there you go. Go build it. And, you've got the tools to do that if you need to do it or want to do it.
I think the worst thing that anybody can do is switch to Linux. In other words, they have a Windows machine or a Mac machine, and they're got it working and it does what they need to do. And then one day they just say, okay, well, I'm sick of this and now I'm going to go do Linux, because it is such a different experience that most people at that point will get so frustrated they'll end up going back. The best thing to do, and I beat this drum every chance I get, so excuse me, I'm going to do it again. If you want to learn how to use Linux, get another computer. Doesn't have to be an expensive one. It could be a very inexpensive low-end laptop. Load Linux on it and poke at it and play with it and break it and reload it and just learn how the system works, because it's not like anything you've used before. Operating systems are not, apples to apples comparisons. And I'm using that a bit of a pun, but you know what I mean. You can do anything with a computer on Linux that you could do with Windows or a Mac, but the thing is that you're going to have to learn how to do that. And it might be a matter of there's not one piece of software that does it all for you. You might have to use 2 or 3. And you might have to do part of it here, part of it there, part of it there. So you'll have to have a new workflow. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's just going to take you time to learn it, and you need to give yourself that time to learn. That's the most important thing. It's to understand that you need to give yourself time to learn. Or if you don't, I've heard of people that have made the complete jump. I've seen people do it. My brother did it. He jumped from Windows to Linux, and he was fine in a week. But but he'd had experience with old Unix machines when he was in college, and he understood how Unix works. So for him, it made perfect sense. He was just like, oh, is this how we're doing this? Yeah. Okay, cool. I got it. Thanks. Boom, gone.
Yeah, but most people, they're not like that. And I agree with you. If you have somebody jump into it, then it can be a bit of an issue. And I have seen people go cold turkey. The lady I was talking about, she didn't have any other computer, and she wanted something her computer was old, and she wanted something that ran faster. And so that's part of the reason that I said I think we should put Linux on it. And I said, you may get frustrated and want Windows back. And thankfully she didn't. She stuck with it, and I tried to teach her, and it sounds like she got it, because it's been about a year and she hasn't had any issues. Well, but she really only browses the web, posts to Facebook, stuff like that, right, watches YouTube, and does Word documents in LibreOffice, right? Office documents. That's it. Right. So for her, the system does everything she needs. And so I think, again, having people do that gentle transition is really smart. The first time that I went to Linux, I had Windows there, but I really tried to not touch it. And that's probably not a good strategy, because you're going to get frustrated. I find it hard to believe that anybody that jumps, with rare exceptions, is not going to get frustrated, right? When that they're, you have to learn a whole new thing. Learning is hard. And, I wanted to learn Linux. And so I said, well, I'm going to stick with it, right? But somebody else might have said, the heck with this, put Windows back on it, or go back to my Mac, or whatever.
That's exactly what I did. The first time that I played with Linux, I wiped the machine, and no, I didn't. I pulled the drives out, put the Windows drive to the side, and loaded Linux, because I was scared of a dual boot, and I was like, well, I can't use this. Ended up putting the other drive back. Of course, a little bit later, I got curious again. The second time I did it, I set up a dual boot, which made it a little bit more convenient to be able to go back and forth. But it took me a lot of goofing around with it to get to a place where I could really be productive with it. Part of that was just the way I learn. I'm just I tend to learn things all at once, and it's like I don't get something, I don't get something, I don't get something, and then snap, I've got it all. And so, therefore, if I want to learn something, I've really got to push myself to do that. And that was for me, that was like a 3 or 4 year period. That took that long to do that, to get where I could be able to do. Also, it was waiting on the software. I think, people these days don't remember, like, one of the things that made Ubuntu 10.10 wonderful, which was Maverick Meerkat, was the fact that that was the first Ubuntu that came along that would play YouTube without a 10 frame per second frame rate in full screen. Those older Linux systems had massive problems, whereas today we don't even think twice about stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, today you open up Firefox or Chrome, launch your YouTube video or whatever, and you're done. Yeah. And so
60 frames a second. Yeah, 4K, no problem.
Yeah, and I mean,
in those days that was an issue.
Yeah, things are very different than they used to be. Thankfully,
and to be quite honest with you, I did not dump Windows until Ubuntu 14.04 came along, because Ubuntu 14.04 was the first version of Linux that I saw that actually did everything that it said it could do. And there wasn't some sort of bug in there that prevented you from doing this, or lock the machine up, or don't click that because that's going to do this. These are the kind of things we used to deal with. 14.04 was the first Ubuntu version, at least, that I looked at that said, okay, this is viable. We could make this work. We can work on this. This can happen. And then since then, it's just been, the sky's been the limit. And the Ubuntu versions in particular have just become more stable and more stable as it's gone along. And now these days, it's just so rock solid. We don't even think in terms of, are we going to be able to do that? It's, of course we will.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But it wasn't always like that. And, I kind of came in when things was more there. Really, if you exclude video editing from when I joined Linux, most things you wanted to do, you could do. And screen tearing was a big issue that, which it still could be an issue now sometimes. But, you have to work around stuff like that. But, I mean, it's like any other operating system. It's not perfect, but... it's trade-offs. I personally like certain things.
Give it another 3 or 4 years, and Wayland will take over completely. And when it does, screen tearing, which is a thing of the past, it's a thing of the past, and it really already is. If you can run a Wayland desktop and you don't have any problems with it, like I'm running Wayland on this machine right now. That's the thing of the past. That is left over from X, and there are ways around that anyway. You can fix it. You can turn on a compositor. You can do a lot of stuff.
And the compositors can fix it. That's what I have on my NVIDIA card, is a compositor.
And that's one of the reasons that I either use GNOME or Cinnamon, is because those two desktops have a compositor running all the time, which some people would say, that's unnecessary overhead. And I say, well, it makes it so all the video is coherent. Because what I would end up doing if it was another desktop that didn't have that would be to turn it on. Or force the video card to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will point out something else, too, about compositors. And this was a thing I seen in a video a while back about Wayland, is they wanted perfect frame synchronization. Thank you. And then some of the gamers came in here, and they're like, well, we'd rather have screen tearing and faster frame rates. And I mean, that's fine if they want to turn that setting on, but leave it off. Because most of us aren't video game people, and if you are, quite frankly, there's a settings menu for you.
I don't understand that, and I'll tell you why I don't understand that. Because my son, when he plays video games, and he plays games on Linux, that's one of the things he cannot stand is screen tearing. So for him, I'd rather see the whole thing without having the extra frame rate. But I'm not a gamer, so I don't know what's important and what isn't. But I do watch a lot of video, and you better be able to play video, baby. Because if you can't, I can't deal.
That's like my computer. Pretty much the whole job description is edit video, watch video. That's basically the process. If you can't do that,
my computer does
video
two
calls.
things. It does video and it plays music.
Yep, and it also plays music, right? It's multimedia. That's what we're here for,
right?
If you can't do that, then But as far as the gaming thing goes, I never really thought that made much sense. So, from what I understand, the screen tearing, if you allow it, it allows a slightly faster update of the frames. And I guess if you're doing like a first-person shooter or something, and maybe it's the difference between winning the game or losing it, maybe it's worth to see a screen tear every once in a while, but. The little bit of games I play, which is a very short list of things, right? That very short list, I am not interested at all in dealing with, like I play Minecraft or Super Tux Kart. You don't want screen tearing and something like that, and I mean, 60 hertz, 60 frames per second looks fine for those things. I don't see. Anyway, I'm not a video game person, so I guess we should cut it off here before I get yelled at in the comments.
Please feel free to yell at Vince in the comments.
And this is why Joe's mic should have been muted during that.
Closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. Why Joe Collins' mic should be muted. On Open Source Tonight. No. Oh, anyway. But yeah, no, I guess we should wrap this little show up. So, but in conclusion, Linux rocks. I bet you knew that was coming like the entire show, but it does. And it also can roll. So, I'm just saying it can rock and it can roll. It was a cheap shot, but I took it.
I think probably my closing remark is that Linux is wonderful. And as time goes on, it will matter less and less what operating system you're on, because we're all moving in the cloud.
Yep, the cloud is increasingly that way. I mean, almost everything I do is in Firefox. Almost everything. It's a very short list of things that's in a separate application.
I had a wonderful time today with my boss. We talked about this before we got on the air, I think, about we are in the process of setting up Amazon workspaces. And we did that and spun up Windows VMs in the cloud. And I got to tell you, they said that you could do it through a browser. I wouldn't want to do it through a browser, but the client and everything, I installed it. And I was amazed at how responsive it was. And I'm on the phone with him going, no, I don't think I need to install this software locally. Put it in here, man, because I was really impressed at how well that was working through the internet. And not only that, I was logged into it through a VPN anyway that was going somewhere else. And I was like, this thing's like local to me. This is insane. And that way he can control it. And we're trying to, this is for the whole company. We're going to be moving in that direction. Right now, everybody has a laptop. And in the future, they're probably going to be having a Chromebook and a login. And at least the people that don't need direct access to the the things where you need hardware. But that's what we were working on today. And I think we're all moving in that direction. I don't know whether we'll ever get to the point where we have a login and your local machine is just going to be a thin client, like a dumb terminal.
I mean, we're heading back that direction, I think. There. Whether we actually get all the way back there or not, I don't know. But, the past often repeats itself.
Funny. When computing started out, it was the big machine in the middle of the campus or the middle of the corporation, and everybody had a terminal, and there were hundreds of users logged into it. And now we went to where everybody had a personal PC that didn't even talk to each other. Then the internet came along. And now through the internet, we're going into this new phase where we're going back to this idea of the mainframe, whether that be Google or Amazon or whatever service you happen to be using, like Google Drives, Slides, Docs, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely the way things are going, I think, is we're heading back to the cloud. And I would say it's better to run your own stuff. I mean, I run a lot of my own internal services because I want control over them. And that's something that you can do. But yeah, I mean, I do think we're definitely heading that direction. No question about it.
Well, I think that anybody who's creative or anybody who's writing software or they're creating videos or creating music or creating art of any kind of talent-based thing, I don't think you want to do that in the cloud. I think that there's always going to be a group of people out there
who
want to have their own computing experience that's not shared. They want all the power. They don't want people, they don't want to rely on somebody else for their, whatever. They want to have it locally. They want to back it up as their own file. I mean, for instance, I'm not somebody, I think people who count on streaming services to always have their favorite song are stupid. You at least should have a file backed up somewhere, especially if it's, something, or of course, in my case, I have the records and CDs too, so I'm a little crazy. But the whole point of it is that don't trust these services, like movies, for instance. They said, with streaming movies, Netflix, Amazon Prime, you'll be able to watch any movie you ever want to.
Until the rights
9 times out of 10, if I think of a movie that I want to see, it ain't available.
Or it's on a streaming service. This is what happens to me most of the time, that I don't have a subscription for presently.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Like, I've got Netflix, but it's on HBO Max.
Whatever. I don't have a subscription there.
Yeah,
Damn,
it's on HBO Max, but I only have Netflix and Hulu. Or it's on Disney Plus, and I don't have whatever.
So I'm a movie fan, classic movie fan from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. I love old movies. The movies that mean the most to me, I have a hard copy of. I have a DVD. And the reason why is because a lot of those movies don't get any love. And sometimes you can stream them and sometimes you can't. And for a while there, you could stream them and then they took them away. It's always worked like that.
It's a rights
issue, I always
issue,
go
right?
and find me a DVD.
Yeah, it's a rights issue. The rights are always changing, and it's so complicated.
But if I'm holding it in my hand, whether it be a record, a CD, a DVD, or whatever, or even just a little USB stick with a file on it, it's mine, and you can't take that away from me. So I'll be one of those people that always has,
You'll be the last. You'll be the last person to have a disc.
Oh, I will.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's not going to happen. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, streaming services, a lot of the stuff I like is streaming original movies and stuff, and it's not even an option. Either that or, the other thing is about streaming. Yeah, you lose the rights to it, and then you can't see it, but it's still, you imagine buying a bunch of DVDs, it gets expensive. So if you're like me and you love movies, I mean, if I bought a DVD of every movie I liked, let's just say that there'd be a big shelf of DVDs back there.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying is you can't do every one, but everybody's got a movie that means something to them if you're a movie fan.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If I want to go watch a movie that means something to me, I don't want to have to go through somebody's streaming crap to get to it. We have the technology. It's like I don't want to. Why should I rely on somebody else's crap? Now, if I ever get to a place where I get, like that tiny house frame of mind, like the Kim Kondo attitude of get rid of everything, then that might be different. But that would be a sacrifice that I would make. But for now, I'm hanging on to my stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I don't have DVDs of everything, but, there is, again, stuff that matters that you want to have copies of. I've got DVDs of a few movies from years ago that was never put on streaming. A lot of these,
a lot of stuff that I have not on stream.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got little pieces of your childhood that you want to make sure that's there. For example, my favorite episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, if I ever want to show it to my kids, I have it on VHS. I'll have to blow real hard on the VHS player in the basement and get that. I was like the last person to have VHS in the world. I went through like 10 copies of this tape because as a kid I would go, let's watch it again.
Machine hooked up. I have a VHS machine hooked up to my 4K television.
One of my neighbors that I help with technical stuff has got one hooked up to their TV as well. So yes, there's people like Joe and them that's like, I'm going to have a VHS player. I actually thought about it.
But honestly, I don't use it. I don't use it very much. I don't have a great deal of stuff on VHS. I have some things that are put away that are probably not worth watching at this point. But we're in a weird transitional phase where I think you're going to see a lot of people, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about having your own computer and being able to tinker. In the next 10 years, I think the question is going to be, what do you actually own? and what can you actually own.
And what is it that you're just paying $20 a month and it's just setting in Disney or
Right.
Apple's or SEK
Yeah.
YVP LLC's data center? I'm just saying. I'm just putting it out there. We might want to do that too.
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the big thing. I think that's going to be the question of the next decade is in computing is what do I actually own? I mean, it's like my boss was just thrilled to death. I mean, it's like, oh, we don't have to have a local server. We don't have to have local machines. People can do this on their own personal machines, or I can give them a Chromebook.
Yeah.
And I was just as excited about it as he was because we had control of it from the top down. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, I mean, for a work situation, it makes sense. But for my personal computing, I don't want to rely on somebody's VM somewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, there is companies that do that with Linux too, by the way, where you can have a GUI Linux VM in the data center and you could put somebody in front of it. And,
it's just a choice. It was just a choice that he made. That's one of the things that Amazon does is that, what do you want?
Yeah.
You want Ubuntu? Here, there's Ubuntu 2204. We'll spin that up for you in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I have a Voltaire account that I use. Voltaire is like, what do you want?
Yeah. I mean, there's different providers out there. I, at one point, used DigitalOcean, and for fun, I spun up a VM. I installed what was it, RDP, I think it was. I installed something to remote into it, and then I was able to sit there and log into a GUI desktop, running GNOME in a data center in New York City that I've never even been in. And, you couldn't really watch YouTube over it, but if you wanted to have, something that somebody's using applications that don't really need, fluid 60 frames per second, which is a lot of things, Word documents, stuff like that, putting in, records into a computer system, pulling up tickets or what, a lot of stuff like that. You don't need that. So, if it's easier just to say, we got a VM in the data center and Vince, you just log in when you need to submit your tickets or whatever it is you need to do. And, you just sit there and you do it and that's it, and you're good to go. I mean, that's compelling, right? It's easy. And the other thing that's really nice about something in a data center like that is if somebody, say, leaves, you just kill the VM, right? You just drop it.
They're done.
And that's it. And you don't have to, I guess you might want the Chromebook back maybe, but, like at the end of the day, if somebody like runs off and takes it, the data's not there. The data's in the data center. But at the same time, the data's in the data center. So if somebody else gets into that VM, you've got a security risk. But it's pros and cons, right? That's just
it's like I said. It's like this is going to be the big question. This is going to be. We have this tremendous technology that exists today, and there's so many choices. And what direction is that going to go? That for me is very exciting, actually. I mean, some people, especially, be like the old codgers like me, are like, well, I just don't like it. I'm not. There's things I don't like, but it's also. Wait a minute, this is really interesting. Let's see which direction this is going to go. You got to keep an open mind. You never know. Something might come along that'll blow you away. Like, that you never know.
Very much indeed. I mean, and again, the fact that you can do that, I mean, it's just powerful. It's all choice. And for me, like with my company, for example, there's certain systems I want people to be able to manage. And my answer to that is not a VM, but just a web interface that I've designed or an open source solution that does that. That's a web interface because everybody's got Chrome or Firefox. If it works in there, big deal, right? And the advantage of that too is that, it's a lot easier. For example, I've got a CRM, excuse me, a customer relations management system. And I can put in my customers in there, and anybody else that I want to can be given a login, and they can see that same customer data. It's something I just recently spun up, but it's one of these things you can do. It's an open source thing called Sweet CRM. But regardless, like this is the thing you can do with the web stack and open source and Linux, and I mean you can. Again, it's going to be interesting to see where we go. I think that the VMs will be there a little bit, but I think the web interface is going to be the main thing, and just give everybody a Chromebook. I think that's what most companies are going to do. But anyway, Joe, where can they find you at online? We should probably wrap this show up. So.
Ain't nobody watching. We've been talking too long anyway. It doesn't matter.
Joe says this as someone's watching.
Look for easylinux.com, E-Z-E-E Linux.com, or look for me on YouTube. Just type in Joe Collins, Easy Linux, or just Joe Collins and Linux, and I'm the first thing that pops up in Google. You don't even have to go to YouTube. You can just type that in and it'll come up.
Very well. Yeah, and you can find me online as well, vincentmaggard.com. You can find me there, and all my social links are available there. In addition to that, you can also find me at this little place called youtube.com. Obviously, you can find me on Open Source Tonight, but you can also find me on my personal channel, Vincent Maggard, where I talk about film and a little bit of everything. And my new show coming up later in the year, Vincent Film Reviews, which you'll never guess what that's about. I'm going to be reviewing these film things we ended up spending the last chunk of the episode over, and Joe wants to wave at us. Here, let's bring his mic up. Joe, you're waving at us?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for watching Open Source Tonight or listening to it, and we'll see you again very soon. Goodbye, everybody.